The first sound wasn't his voice. It was the dry thud of a thick folder slammed onto the polished wooden table. The echo in the sealed room made a porcelain coffee cup tremble, hopping slightly as if it wanted to escape. The fluorescent lights above buzzed like trapped bees in a glass jar. Then the voice came, cold and smooth. Every word clipped like it had been rehearsed a dozen times in front of a mirror. Effective immediately. Sophia Carter. You are terminated from your position as lead systems engineer. The room froze. Not a single breath dared make a sound. I could hear the ballpoint pen stop midair, the shuffle of suit jackets, as board members glanced at each other for a split second before dropping their eyes. No one wanted to get caught in the blast. I looked straight at Jonathan Price, the new CEO, hailed as the shining star of Helios Systems. He sat at the head of the table, navy suit pressed crisp, red tie knotted so tight it seemed to strangle his carotid artery. He carried himself like a spoiled kid who had just snatched a juice box from a classmate, smug but with insecurity flickering behind his eyes. I had seen many bosses, but none walked into a boardroom looking so much like a child throwing a tantrum over stolen candy. For a moment, my heart pounded, blood rushing to my ears. Memories collided. 7 years of exhaustion, nights asleep at my keyboard, missing my mother's 70th birthday because of a deadline, eating cup noodles in a pitch-black lab, the only light flickering from server screens. All of it crushed into one cold sentence, a clean slash. But I didn't scream. I didn't slam the table or curse or play the drama queen. He was probably waiting for, eager to humiliate me one last time. I simply closed the file in front of me, stacked it neatly. I stood, my back straighter than it had ever been. And then I spoke, voice calm, steady, as if thanking a waiter for refilling my coffee. Thank you. Just 2 words. I saw eyebrows lift, chairs creak as people shifted back, confused. Some frowned like I had just swallowed an ice cube whole. Jonathan stayed rigid, face fixed in triumph. But I caught the twitch at the corner of his mouth, the slight narrowing of his eyes. A flicker, but enough. My thank you unsettled him more than any outburst ever could. What they didn't know was that I had prepared for this day long ago. I turned and walked out of the boardroom. The long hallway ahead swallowed my steps, glass walls reflecting the image of a woman freshly dismissed. But inside, I didn't feel small. I felt strangely light, as if an invisible shackle had just fallen away. I remembered that night, 2 years ago, when finance suddenly announced a 40% budget cut for research. Everyone thought the Quantum Modular Grid project was dead. I stayed until dawn, rewriting the entire system structure, and quietly formed a small entity to secure the intellectual property rights. Back then, no one bothered reading the fine-ish print. They just patted my shoulder and said, "Do what you must to get us through the storm." I had smiled to myself. I knew I had planted a safeguard for the future. The elevator doors opened, and I stepped inside. They closed behind me, sealing off the room where they thought they had just witnessed an execution. I didn't blame them. In San Francisco's tech world, loyalty is cheaper than a latte. They feared Jonathan, feared the new power. They thought the story ended there. They were wrong. The elevator reached the ground floor, doors sliding open. Car horns blared, exhaust fumes tangled with the smell of fresh coffee from the corner cafe. The world spun on, indifferent to a lead engineer just fired. I drew a long breath and stepped out, never looking back. Jonathan Price might think he had erased an obstacle, but in truth, he had just opened a door he didn't even know existed. And that door, once open, would drag Helios Systems into a storm he could never control. I smiled, not for him, not for the board, but for myself, because sometimes thank you isn't the end. It's a promise of a beginning. As I walked away from that building, I asked myself, where are you hearing this story? On the road, in a quiet living room, or at your desk in the office? Leave a comment. I want to know. And if you see yourself in this story, hit subscribe and stay with me to the end. The door of my small apartment in the Mission District shut behind me with a sharp click. I stood still for a few seconds in the dark, listening to my heart still pounding from the meeting. Outside, San Francisco roared with car horns and music spilling from the corner bar, but inside, there was nothing but suffocating emptiness. I switched on the light. The apartment looked like a makeshift lab. The dining table was buried under files, contracts, and system schematics. Old coffee cups stacked one over another, brown rings staining the wood. My laptop was still open, the screen frozen on an unfinished report I hadn't sent before my execution in the boardroom this morning. I sank into the wooden chair, weightless. My phone buzzed hard, screen flashing nonstop. Messages from my old engineering team. Sophia, are we still allowed to keep coding? Logan, HR says we have to stop everything until further notice. Priya, Dylan, blunt as ever. Guess we're disposable after all. I read each line, my chest tightening. They were the best people I had ever led, and now they were like soldiers abandoned mid-battle. I wanted to answer, to reassure them, but my hands hovered over the keyboard and dropped again. I had nothing to say. No words could erase the chaos Jonathan had just unleashed. I stood and walked to the small wooden cabinet in the corner. On top sat a few old photos. My mother, smiling gently at her 70th birthday, the one I had missed. A picture of me and the team in the lab, clutching cold pizza boxes, still grinning after an all-nighter. I touched my mother's photo lightly, my finger trembling. The question surfaced. 7 years. Was it worth it? The phone rang again. This time a call. I hesitated, then picked up. Honey, I just read the news. Are you all right? My mother's voice trembled, but she tried to stay steady. I'm fine, Mom, I answered, though my own voice sounded hollow. Sweetheart, sometimes letting go is the greatest victory. I don't want to see you drained any longer. I closed my eyes, swallowing slowly. For a moment, I wanted to believe her, to put this burden down. But then Jonathan's eyes flashed in my memory, the way he looked at me like excess inventory. My restraint twisted into something else. After hanging up, I set the phone aside. Instead of sleeping, I pulled a box of files from under the table, old papers, contracts, and printed emails from 2 years ago, when the budget was slashed. I remembered that night, when the team was crushed. I stayed behind until dawn, rewriting the legal terms and embedding a copyright safeguard for myself. I flipped page after page, scanning fast, my heart racing. Then I found it, the tiny line, faint among thousands of words. In the event the project is terminated or direct supervision is removed, full ownership and operational control of the technology shall automatically revert to the chief architect. My hand trembled, but not from fear this time. I laughed, softly, the first real laugh of the entire day. Jonathan Price might think he had buried me, but in truth, he had just pulled the lever on the time bomb I planted in that contract 2 years ago. Outside the window, the city still glowed, car horns and music echoing into the night. The world didn't care about a lead engineer just been fired, but in this small apartment, I knew. Another door had just opened. The next morning, I woke later than usual. No 5 a.m. alarm, no 8 a.m. tech stand-up, no blinking code waiting for me to fix. Instead, I woke into an odd silence, so quiet I could hear the heater wheeze in the corner. I poured a cup of coffee and turned on the TV. Jonathan Price was everywhere. On CNBC, he sat confident in a gray suit, buttons done, face polished under the studio lights. His voice flowed smoothly, like he was reading a memorized script. Helios Systems is entering an era of innovation. We are moving away from individuals toward a sustainable, optimized, flexible platform. This is the age of synergy, of streamlining, and of optimization. I laughed. He rattled off buzzwords like someone hitting rewind on an old cassette. If you have never built a real system, those shiny phrases might sound convincing. To me, they sounded like a 3-year-old bragging about flying a plane. The feed cut to the board. Old men in white collars nodded, eyes shining like they were hearing classical music. On Twitter, analysts clipped the segment and slapped on the hashtag #NewEraHelios. I sat there sipping coffee, smiling a little. I felt no anger, only a mild sarcasm. Every promise he made stood on sand. The first wave would wash it all away. My phone buzzed. Message from Dylan. The boss got through 3 minutes and I counted 7 buzzwords. Record. I snorted, replied, "Careful. Name a few more, and HR might classify you as a strategic asset." Dylan sent a rolling, laughing emoji. In that moment, I realized, though pushed out, I was still tethered to people who actually understood the work. That afternoon, an email arrived from a Helios lawyer. Subject line, "Notice of Intellectual Property Review." The tone was threatening. Helios reserves the right to review patents developed during your employment. The implication was clear. They intended to take back what belonged to me. I was not surprised. I had expected this move. Jonathan did not have the patience to rely on the press alone. He would play the legal card. I smiled and opened the file cabinet, pulling out the yellowed contract bundle. Clause 7.2.1, signed, stamped, and legally binding. They could threaten, but the law sat on my side. In the evening, I walked Market Street. Helios billboards glowed with the new slogan, Helios Quantum Grid, future without limits. I looked up and laughed out loud. No limits, huh? They were about to learn what limits really felt like. Back at the apartment, I turned the TV on again. Jonathan was on a tech talk show. The host asked, "Do you think the sudden turnover in senior staff will slow progress?" Jonathan sat up straight, smiling. On the contrary. We removed bloated elements so the machine runs smoothly, a strategic decision. I leaned back and chuckled. Removed bloated elements. He spoke of me like trash files on a hard drive, but that trash file was the system key. In that moment, I felt oddly light, no anger, no bitterness, only certainty. His circus would not last, and I, the one tossed out, held the strongest card. At 9 o'clock in the morning, the San Francisco sky was clearer than usual. Sunlight spilled across Market Street, bouncing off the glass facade of Helios Systems headquarters. The city had no idea that inside that tower, a grand play was about to begin. I sat in my small apartment a few blocks away. My laptop was already open on the table, Slack still logged in, the company chat showing me as a member, maybe because no one had the time or the nerve to remove me yet. On the TV, the live feed from Helios's main hall glared bright. Spotlights blazed, the company logo spun in a loop, and the front row was lined with investors, their ties straight, notebooks balanced neatly on their laps. Jonathan Price strutted on stage like a bargain actor. His gray suit hugged tight, his red tie screamed for attention. His smile so rehearsed I knew he had practiced it 100 times in the mirror. He raised a hand, signaled for the music to fade, then let his polished voice boom, smooth as lacquer. "Ladies and gentlemen, today Helios Systems will show you the future. This is not just a platform. It is a new era of digital energy. The Quantum Modular Grid will transform this industry forever." Scattered, awkward applause followed. He turned toward the giant screen behind him, motioning for the engineers to start. Lines of code rolled. The dashboard began to load. I sipped my coffee and smiled, because I knew exactly what awaited him. You might wonder, didn't they test this demo? Of course they did. They rehearsed multiple times in a simulated environment. In staging, everything worked perfectly, because I had left them a temporary key, a demo key, enough to build a fake stage, fake lights, fake applause. But today was no rehearsal. This was live, in production, in front of real investors, and only the real key could unlock the system. Jonathan didn't have it. The dashboard froze, the code halted, then one cold line appeared, merciless in its bluntness. License authorization expired. A clean cut. The hall went silent. At first they thought it was minor. Jonathan forced a nervous laugh, trying to sound calm. Just a hiccup. 2 minutes. 2 minutes passed. Nothing. 5 minutes. The gray text still mocked them. 10 minutes. Investors began shaking their heads, whispering. One snapped his notebook shut, glare sharp as glass. Another rose stepped out with a phone pressed to her ear. Chairs screeched. My Slack pinged nonstop. Logan typed, It worked in staging. Why is it frozen now?" Priya replied quickly. "Because the staging key isn't the production key. That's all." Dylan chimed in, blunt as ever. Translation, "We're screwed." I laughed, not bitter, but relieved. At last my preparations spoke for themselves. On stage, Jonathan bent down, hissing at the pale engineers scrambling behind him. The spotlight revealed sweat streaming down his forehead. His grin stayed fixed, but its fraud was obvious. "Everything is under control," he repeated, voice shaking. "We just need a few more minutes." But each passing minute was a drop carving stone, eroding patience. 15 minutes, 20. The room buzzed loudly with frustration. Faces once indifferent now tightened, annoyed. His mic screeched with a sharp, feedback shrill, drawing grimaces. He fumbled, making the mess worse. Then the moment struck. Ellen, the COO famed for her composure, shot up to her feet. She raised her tablet high, her voice slicing through the gloss. "Wait, are we saying we've actually lost control of the platform?" The question hit like a hammer. The hall erupted in shouts, investors leaning forward, eyes blazing for answers. Jonathan paled, lips trembling. "Of course not. We have redundancies. Everything is fine." But his last words cracked, snapping like a string stretched too far. No one believed him anymore. In my apartment, I sat still, Slack glowing bright. Priya wrote, "This isn't a bug, it's locked," Logan replied. "And guess who holds the real key?" Priya sent one icon, a lock. I leaned back, closed my eyes, and let out a soft laugh. Not mocking, but in relief that justice had finally knocked. Jonathan thought he erased me, a name struck from the org chart, but in truth, he had triggered the time bomb I planted 2 years ago in that contract. The demo collapsed in humiliation. News outlets wrote flatly, "Helios faces a technical glitch in the live showcase." They called it a glitch, but I knew it wasn't. It was the rule they signed. I only waited for it to activate. Late morning sunlight spilled through my window, lighting the messy files scattered across my table. I closed the laptop, drew a long breath. It felt like a chessboard flipped into a brand new game. I whispered to myself, low enough for no one else to hear, "Game on." That night, my apartment stayed lit until nearly dawn. Old files lay scattered across the table, red pen crossing out clause after clause. I sat in silence, reading the terms over and over as if I could tattoo into my mind the fact that this was real. I held the power. Still, paper can be airtight and my chest heavy. After so many years, I am not used to standing on the sidelines, while a company I once treated like family falls apart. Worst of all, the engineers I love are stuck in the chaos. Around midnight, I rose and walked to the wooden cabinet in the corner. Old frames are under dust. I touched the photo of my mother, taken at her 70th birthday, that I missed because of a deadline. Her gentle smile felt like a soft reproach. I heard her voice in my head say, "Sophia, sometimes letting go is the greatest victory because you cannot save the whole world." I wanted to believe her. I truly did. But then Jonathan's face flashed back, the way he called me a bloated element to be cut, as if I were a trash file on a hard drive. I knew I could not let go. Not for money, not for power, but because I would not let him humiliate everything I sacrificed. My phone buzzed. A message from Logan. They're in chaos. Jonathan wants us to rebuild the system from scratch in 3 days. Totally unreasonable. Priya followed. Ethan says he will lead, but I'm not sure he understands the whole architecture. Ethan's name made my heart drop. He had been my deputy, the one I trusted, the man who shared cold pizza with me on sleepless nights. I thought he was the only one who could guard the system when I was gone. Now he's standing with Jonathan. Before I could reply, a direct message from Ethan appeared. "Sophia, listen. We know you hold the key, but Helios can't stop because of one silly clause. You don't want to destroy everything we built, do you?" I stared at the line, my chest tightening. Part of me wanted to believe he was forced, but the words were clear. Ethan had turned. I typed back. "Ethan, you know that clause is not silly. It is the only protection I embedded for us." He answered fast. "Protection or a way for you to hoard power alone. I was there, Sophia. I watched you work nights, and I saw you annotate every contract line. Now I wonder, did you always prepare for this day so you could be the only one who calls the shots I let the phone fall, feeling as if someone had punched me hard in the chest?" He was not entirely wrong. I had prepared for this day, but not to seize power. I wanted to ensure that if everything collapsed, at least one person would understand how to save it. I chose to be that person. In the quiet, I sat at my desk, logged into the admin console only I knew. A long list of system requests scrolled by, including a string of odd requests from Helios's internal IPS, Ethan. He was trying to bypass. I watched for a few minutes. He tried everything, bypassing old modules, spinning up a fake server, even writing code to spoof the key. Each attempt was blocked. I had planted traps at every layer. On his 10th try, the system booted him out. Unauthorized attempt detected, access revoked. I sat stunned before the screen, hurt and relieved at the same time. Hurt that the person I trusted most had betrayed me. Relieved that the system remained secure. Outside the window, San Francisco's night still sparkled with thousands of lights. Inside my chest, the night felt darker than ever. I had lost an ally and likely gained an enemy. I poured another glass of wine, stared at the dark screen. I thought of my mother, of the sacrifices, of the engineers being worn down by a CEO who didn't understand technology. I asked myself if I was selfish. Was I becoming what I hate, a keeper of power who leaves others behind? Then another message popped up. Della, the team's most sarcastic kid, wrote just 2 words. Still yours? I smiled. Not big, just the faint curl of a lip. However it goes, someone understands. Someone believes. And that is why I cannot stop. I closed the files and looked at my reflection in the window glass. No longer the Sophia who got fired. No longer the woman weakened by betrayal. In the glass stood a different Sophia, the one who realized this fight was more than work. It was an honor, it was the truth, and it was only beginning. The morning after the first crash, the news had already spread across Silicon Valley. Tech outlets ran headlines. Helios faces an outage during the demo, and investors question its stability. Some analysts sneered on Twitter. The new era of digital energy begins with Error 404. I read it and smiled, shook my head. But I knew Jonathan was not the sort to sit still after a fall. He would thrash, and when the arrogant thrash, the scene is both terrifying and absurd. Sure enough, 3 days later, the second collapse hit. Helios announced internally that the system had been fully restored. I sat in my apartment, drinking coffee, watching Slack. Less than an hour after the message, Logan pinged. Production just went down. Not just the demo. Customer sandboxes, staging, and even investor testbeds are dead. All screens show license authorization expired. This time, it was no longer a backstage hiccup. It was a full outage, bleeding outward to customers, partners, and vendors. The story exploded. News feeds ran nonstop. Within a morning, the hashtag Helios collapse topped the trends. I could picture their boardroom. Directors shouting, assistants running, phones ringing off the hook. Jonathan is sweating, trying to smile through it. I did not need to be there to imagine it. As I guessed, Priya's message arrived. He's losing it. The board was dragged into an emergency meeting. No more nods at buzzword speeches. There were shouts, slamming fists. Some accused Jonathan of deceiving the board. Others weakly insisted it was a technical fault. No one believed it. The truth lay bare. Helios could not control its own platform. Meanwhile, Jonathan played his final card. He flooded the media with a new story. He accused me, Sophia Carter, of sabotaging the system. Rogue architect, traitor, blackmailer. He published doctored emails, edited logs, and a few forged artifacts styled as evidence. I watched the evening news. My face flashed on screen with the caption, Ex-Helios architect accused of sabotage. I sat still, the throat tightening. Even knowing it was false, seeing my name next to sabotage made blood run hot. Calls and messages poured in. Reporters phoned. Friends texted to ask if it was true. My mother called, voice trembling. Sophia, I just saw the news. They say you sabotaged the company. Are you okay? I closed my eyes and answered calmly. I'm fine, Mom. Don't worry. They are thrashing. But inside, a fire ignited. Jonathan had crossed a line, and then what he did not expect happened. Ethan. Ethan, who had tried to bypass the system, became the one to expose him. Maybe conscience, maybe he had simply been used too far. One night, Ethan posted a bundle on internal Slack. Emails, log files, and documents proved that Jonathan staged fake evidence to pin blame on me. He shared it with the board and the entire company. Within minutes, more than 1,000 Helios employees saw it. No one doubted anymore. The board exploded. This time they fought over truth, not tech. The truth was ugly. Jonathan had not only failed technically, but he had lied, framed, and risked the company to save his ego. Logan texted, "You should have seen his face. He looked like a cornered animal." I closed my eyes and pictured Jonathan in the meeting. Tie loosened, eyes darting, hands trembling, sweat darkening his collar. No longer the smug CEO or the star for the cameras, just a desperate man watched by his own allies. I did not jump in joy. I poured another glass of wine and let a slow relief spread. The game had reached a turning point. Jonathan's last move had failed. He had nothing left. Outside, San Francisco shone as always. Inside, something of the darkness eased. I knew the fight was not over, but this time the initiative was not his. It was mine. That morning, I sat in a small coffee shop on the corner of Valencia. The smell of strong espresso wrapped the air, grinders whining and cups clinking beneath a low jazz track. I flipped the San Francisco Chronicle, and the front page headline hit like a hammer. "Helios Systems is in turmoil," the CEO questioned. "Board holds emergency closed session." Below it, a photo of Jonathan Price, pale face, crooked tie, eyes rimmed red from sleeplessness. A different Jonathan from the one who swaggered on TV, rattling off buzzwords about a new era. I set the paper aside and lifted my cappuccino for a sip. My phone buzzed, an unknown number. I hesitated, then answered. "Carter," a deep, dry voice said. "The board wants to see you. Today." I smiled. The last time I walked into a meeting, they did not even let me finish a sentence. A pause on the line, the voice softened. "Things have changed. The company needs you. We need you." I did not answer right away. Part of me wanted to hang up and let them drown in the mess they made. Another part wanted to face them, to let them see who really held the power. That afternoon, I returned to Helios for the first time since my firing. As I stepped into the lobby, dozens of eyes followed. Whispers rippled like small waves. "She's the one, the key holder." The elevator took me to the 35th floor. When the boardroom doors opened, the air felt like a pressure cooker. Long tables, directors sitting stiff, faces drawn. Jonathan stood against the wall, no longer arrogant, but cornered, eyes darting. The board chair spoke, trying to keep steady. "Carter, thank you for coming. Helios is teetering. Investors are pulling out and customers are losing faith. Only you can restore the system. We want to discuss a way forward." I set my bag down slowly and sat, leaning back, eyes scanning the table. Funny. Days ago, you tossed me out like trash. Today, you call me the escape route. A director hurried in, almost pleading. "We admit we were wrong, but now is not the time to dwell. The company is collapsing, and we are prepared to give you the authority you deserve." A stack of papers slid across. I skimmed. Bold lines jumped off the page. Powers equal to the CEO. Double the salary, veto power over every technical decision. In short, they offered to crown me ruler of Helios if I brought the system back. Jonathan snapped. He jumped to his feet, voice sharp with fury. "Is this a joke?" "She sabotaged the company. She planted traps, backed us into a corner, and now she plays savior. You actually intend to hand power to this traitor?" I did not look at him. I addressed the board, my voice steady and cold. He is right about one thing. I hold power. But not because I sabotaged anything. I saved this system dozens of times while you slept. I wrote the code and I signed the contracts. I embedded protections because I knew someone like him would come along, and you let it happen. Silence fell. Faces flushed. Some lowered their eyes. Jonathan ground. His teeth, fists clenching, but he did not step forward. I closed the folder and pushed it back across the table. "You think you can buy me with money and status? There is one thing you cannot buy. Truth. And truth is not for sale to Helios anymore." The room erupted. A director slammed a fist down and shouted, "Carter, you will push us all over the edge." I stood, calm and cold. Number. You have been falling for a long time. I am simply not pulling you back. I turned and walked out. Behind me, the chair scraping, the shouting, Jonathan's rage tangled in the chaos. I did not look back. When the door closed, the corridor looked like a cleared path. My steps rang out decisive and sure. In the lobby, eyes followed again, but this time they carried something like acknowledgement. I stepped out into the late sunlight and felt my shadow stretch long across the sidewalk. I breathed deep and understood, in that moment, that the last tie to Helios had been severed. They had lost me for good, and in their desperation, they handed me the power to rewrite the rest of the story. 2 days after I walked out of Helios's boardroom, the email landed in my inbox. Subject: invitation to discuss strategic alignment. Sender: Ardent Dynamics. My heart skipped. Ardent, Helios's longtime rival. The same name Jonathan once mocked as a paper tiger. I wasn't naive enough to think they suddenly wanted a friendly chat. The timing was too perfect. Helios is in full collapse. Their enemy is reaching out with an open hand. The message was short. We understand the current situation. If you're willing, we'd like to meet in person. Contact Chris Dalton. I laughed under my breath. Chris Dalton. I remembered him well. A senior engineer at Helios was once too blunt for Jonathan's taste. He had been fired for daring to push back in a meeting. I could still see him standing, slamming a folder onto the table, saying, "You're going to ruin this company, Jonathan." Then, walking out without looking back. Now he was across the battlefield. I agreed to meet. The cafe sat in a quiet block near the Embarcadero, a place tech people chose when they wanted to talk without ears around. Chris was already there, twirling his coffee cup like an old habit. A few new lines marked his face, but the sharp grin was the same. "Didn't expect to see you here, Sophia," he said with a trace of irony. "The day I was kicked out of Helios, I bet you'd end up the same." "I just didn't think Jonathan would be stupid enough to throw you out himself." I shrugged. Sometimes stupidity is a strategy. It just burns faster than expected. Chris laughed loudly, turning heads in the cafe. Then he leaned closer, eyes sharp. "Helios has lost control. We know it. And we know only one person can run that system. You. I'm here to ask if you want to turn your creation into the weapon of someone who deserves it more." I didn't answer right away. I searched his eyes for the catch. He slid a tablet across. The screen lit with a contract I knew by heart. My own draft from 2 years ago. The clause is highlighted in yellow. In the event of termination, full rights revert to the original architect. "Jonathan has no idea," Chris whispered. "But we do, and we want to work with you." I drew a long breath. This was no longer a shadow game. Ardent had seen everything, and what they wanted wasn't permission. They wanted to buy. 2 days later, I walked into Ardent's headquarters. The new building gleamed, the smell of paint and carpet still fresh. No chaos here. The air was brisk, ordered. Chris led me to the top-floor boardroom. Long table, leather chairs, warm golden light. A thick folder sat waiting. I opened it and nearly laughed. The number is printed in bold on the first page, $1.2 billion. My finger slid across the lines. They wanted to buy it all. The patent, the rights, the control. One signature, and the fortune would change hands. Chris watched me, gaze sharp, voice steady. "Helios is dying. Once you sign, we don't just take the tech. We take the throne. And you. Walk away free, wealthy, recognized as the one who changed the game." I leaned back, silent. Part of me wanted to sign on the spot. After years of sacrifice and betrayal, seeing that number under my name was intoxicating. But another part pushed back. I hadn't built this just to let another corporation turn it into a blade. I remembered the nights with my team. Logan laughed when the code finally compiled. "Priya is pouring coffee at 3 a.m. Dylan mutters while typing. I couldn't let that work be reduced to a weapon for the highest bidder. I turned to Chris, voice even. "I'll sell, but with conditions." His brow tightened. Conditions. I pulled out the papers I had prepared, slid them across. "I won't be an employee of Ardent. I won't be a figurehead either. I'll be chief advisory architect with authority to oversee how the tech is used. If you misuse it, I retain the right to revoke." Chris sat still, then smiled. I should have expected that. The Sophia Carter I know never traded just for money. He signed the addendum and slid it back. Deal. I took the pen. The ink ran dark blue, my signature clear and final. One line, done. The room hushed. I heard no hum of vents, no scratch of pens, only my heartbeat steady and strong. Relief washed over me. Not thrilled for the money, but the weight lifting. At last, I controlled the fate of what I built. Chris extended his hand, grin wide. "Welcome to Ardent, Sophia. From here on, the game runs by our rules." I clasped his hand, firm and warm, but in my mind, a different line echoed. "Number. The game still runs by me." When I stepped out of Ardent's tower, sunset drenched San Francisco in fire. I paused, head tilted back, the bay wind in my face. In that moment, I knew a chapter had closed and another had begun. Jonathan had tried to erase me. Instead, I had written my name into a deal that would be remembered for decades, the $1.2 billion deal. The news exploded just one day after I signed with Ardent. Front page of the Wall Street Journal. Ardent Dynamics acquires Quantum Modular Grid IP in a $1.2 billion deal. TechCrunch. Helios loses core patent. Stock plummets to a record low. Twitter, LinkedIn, and Reddit are filled with comments. A CEO who loses a multi-billion-dollar IP. This will be a case study in every MBA class. I sat in my small apartment, TV tuned to a finance channel. Helios's stock chart glowed red, plunging like a cliff face. The commentator's tone carried no mercy. In just 24 hours, Helios has lost over $8 billion in value. Partners are pulling contracts, and customers flock to Ardent. Jonathan Price is officially the worst CEO of the decade. I set my glass of wine on the table, leaned back, and smiled. Not the smile of revenge, but of relief. Justice had finally shown up. A week late, Helios held a press conference. I hadn't planned to watch, but curiosity won. On screen, Jonathan sat at a long table, microphones and cameras aimed from every angle. Flashbulbs lit his hollow face, sunken eyes, and loose tie. A reporter asked, "What do you have to say about losing Helios's core patent to Ardent?" Jonathan swallowed hard, voice rough. That was an unforeseen oversight, a lapse in management, but we will recover." The words barely left his lips before the room erupted in scoffs. Reporters pounced, circling like wolves. "You call a $1.2 billion loss an oversight? Did you even read the contract before signing?" "Do you think it's time to resign?" Jonathan stammered, face red, words breaking apart. Cameras flashed, freezing the fall of a man who once strutted as a visionary. Finally, the board chair stepped up to the mic. "Jonathan Price will resign as CEO of Helios Systems, effective immediately." I switched off the TV and sat quietly. I thought I would feel triumph. Instead, I felt inevitability. Jonathan had dug his own grave the day he took that chair. I had only waited for the ground to give way. One afternoon, walking out of Ardent's offices, golden light spilled across the street. A group of young employees huddled by the entrance. As I passed, a girl whispered, "That's Sophia Carter, the one who toppled a CEO with a signature." I didn't turn back. I only smiled. Because no, I hadn't defeated Jonathan with a signature. I defeated him with patience, with belief in my own work, and by refusing to be bought by hollow power. That night, I poured a glass of red wine and watched city lights flicker through my window. I thought of my mother. I thought of her words. "Sophia, you can't save the whole world." She was right. I can't save the whole world. But I can save the truth. I can protect the work I built and the people who believed in me. Sometimes that is enough to change the whole field. My phone buzzed. "Dylan. Boss, I mean..." "Sophia, whatever you do next, count me in. Logan. Thank you for proving we weren't crazy to believe in." This project. Priya sent one emoji. A star. I laughed, tears sliding down my cheek. Not tears of sorrow, but of gratitude. I had never fought alone. The next day, headlines gave me names. Architect of Revenge, the woman who outsmarted Silicon Valley's arrogance. But I didn't need titles. I only needed one truth. I had safeguarded what I created, kept it from being twisted by men who only worshipped profit. When a TV host asked me live, "If you could send one message to the people who underestimated you, what would you say?" I looked straight at the camera and answered calmly, "Just one thing. Thank you. Thank you for giving me the chance to prove that real power doesn't come from titles or boardrooms. It comes from knowing you hold the truth, and the truth cannot be fired." The studio went silent for a beat before the applause rolled in. Now, telling this story, I don't think of Jonathan as an enemy. I think of him as a reminder. Arrogance has a price. Those who build on words alone will always fall before those who quietly do the work. And I want to say this to you, the one listening now. If you've ever been dismissed, sidelined, or told you don't matter, remember, your value isn't decided in someone else's boardroom. It's written in what you build, in the persistence you keep. Helios lost $1.2 billion in a blink. Jonathan lost everything in 2 weeks. And I smiled, said thank you, and rewrote history on my own terms.